Hi, everyone. I wanted to push out a quick lecture to you all just to lay the groundwork for uh, Boehm's dialogue that you're reading and working through. We'll be doing that both this week and next. So, what I wanted to do today was just send you a very brief kind of outline of Boehm, of dialogue, of its significance, and then probably later this week or early next week, I'll send you a little bit more comprehensive lecture that goes over uh, some of the chapters that you're working through and that digs in a little bit to some of the theoretical and more ethereal ideas of Boehm that you may have a little bit of difficulty working through in the text, and then also just talk about some fundamental principles related to dialogue. So often, so Boehm's ideas come to us through the text that you're reading called On Dialogue, but often you'll hear people talk about the process as Bohemian dialogue or dialogue in the spirit of David Bohm or something like conversation cafes or things like that. The main idea behind dialogue for Boehm and how he outlines it is that it's a free flowing group conversation in which participants attempt to kind of come to a common understanding with each other, that they honor each person's point of view, and that they do that in a non judgmental fashion. So that's kind of the overall process of dialogue. And it really is a process in the way that Boehm outlines it. Let's talk a little bit more about Boehm, and then we'll talk about what dialogue is and isn't uh, as you kind of continue to work through your reading. So, uh, David Bohm, I think I'd mentioned this in class before, but he's an American scientist, really one of the most significant theoretical physicists of the 20th century. He's a mathematician, just a deeply thoughtful man. On Dialogue comes out of work later in his career that's related to his interest in philosophy and communication, and also the ideas around or emerging ideas around mindfulness and meditation. He's interested in how, kind of in a post World War II industrial and technological age, communication, is consistently breaking down both globally, nationally, in organizations, and even between people. So one of his goals in writing on dialogue was to overcome, these the increasing kind of self isolation and fragmentation that he saw as a danger to societies and in regard to social progress and to just progress in general. So let's talk a little bit about what dialogue is, and then we'll talk about what it isn't. So first of all, dialogue, at least in the way that Boehm outlines it, has a couple of major qualities. Number one, it's a shared experience. And usually it's an in-person experience, meaning people are sitting around in a circle looking at each other, and that's why I had said, this semester usually we do the dialogue, the process of dialogue, or our in-class dialogue face to face, because it's really important in that context that we're all sitting together, that we see each other, and that we're able to see visual cues and things like that. So it's a shared inquiry. It could be take place in an online environment, say via something like Zoom, but usually in that context, I feel like it would work best to do it more in smaller groups where it's more manageable. It's usually focused around a common purpose or topic. So, a topic that people choose, something that's important to them. It could be something usually controversial, but not necessarily. It's about repeating and listening to a variety of different voices and perspectives, meaning that dialogue is not about groupthink. It's not about somebody presenting something and then everybody just kind of going along with the crowd. It's about people being allowed to share their point of view, whatever that is, and for other people to listen dispassionately and respectfully to that point of view. Doesn't necessarily call for action. The action is really just listening to other people's perspectives, seeing what they think about that topic or that issue. Uh, doesn't mean that dialogue there's no action or no possibility of action, but really the beginning point for dialogue for Boehm is that we all honor and listen to each other's point of views around a subject, and that we are able to openly and freely discuss what inform those perspectives and to better understand how other people's perspectives were shaped, maybe by their personal history or their political history or their social history or their cultural history, whatever that might be. And then maybe as a series of dialogues unfold, there's some movement towards action. But dialogue is definitely not about, we're going to have a half an hour meeting and then all come to an agreement and move forward. It's definitely more process based, and it's something that unfolds over time. So the purpose is to solve kind of the communication crises that Boehm was seeing, um, in our contemporary society, but also just to think about, you know, us as human beings and our consciousness and how we how we kind of process our thoughts and how we kind of problem solve and all of those type of things. So there's no predefined purpose usually, not necessarily an agenda, but more just thinking together and working together collectively or discussing collectively. Um, Let me see what else. I have a quote actually that I'll give you, and then I'll give you some more next week as well. But Boehm says that dialogue is really aimed at going into the whole thought process and changing the way the thought process occurs collectively. He says we haven't really paid much attention to thought as a process. We've engaged in thoughts, but we have only paid attention to the content, not the process. And he says, why does this require attention? Everything requires attention, really. So that, again, this is going back to the idea of mindfulness. If we ran machines without paying attention to them, they would break down. Our thought too is a process and requires attention. Otherwise, it's going to go wrong. Um, so I want to talk to you as well, just briefly about principles of dialogue, and then we'll talk about what dialogue isn't. So the principles of dialogue are oriented around four different areas. Number one, the group agrees that no group level decisions will be made in the conversation. Number two, each individual agrees to suspend judgment in the conversation. So meaning you're going to be non-judgmental and just honor each person's views and what they have to say. Number three, uh, as individuals suspend judgment, they're also simultaneously honest and transparent with their point of view, meaning you're not performing, you're not seeking to influence, you're not trying to hide anything, you're just honest and transparent with your points of view. Number four, individuals in the conversation try to build on other individuals' ideas in the conversation or respond to those ideas in a honest way and in an open, empathetic way. So that leads us to what dialogue isn't. Dialogue isn't about my viewpoint being privileged above everybody else's, meaning it's not about, I need to go and improve my point. This is kind of something that I think is important, and I'm going to prove it to everybody else and show them how I'm right. It's, as I said before, it's more about um, really honoring and thinking about why do people think what they think around this topic, where have those kind of viewpoints come from, and why might they hold those viewpoints. So it's about really thinking together, if you will, as a group, or exploring things as a group. Uh, it's not defensive, meaning, again, you're trying to listen open and honestly. You're trying to be empathetic to other people and just simply take in what they're saying, but not be defensive or see it as an attack on yourself or your values. It's not performative, meaning, again, as I said before, it's not groupthink. You're not performing. You're not trying to, uh, um, show off or show that you agree with everybody else. Sometimes that takes a certain amount of bravery, especially if there's five other people that kind of are seemingly saying similar things. To say something different, often takes a lot of some courage in order to do so, but that's all part of the process of dialogue and should be honored. And then finally, it's not selfish. It's not something that I'm seeking only to advance my point of view or it's all about me. It's more about the group. So those are the underlying aspects of dialogue. As you read through the first couple of chapters, where Boehm really focuses on the principles of dialogue, I want you to think about those things, and I want you to think about how they fundamentally change the way we might discuss topics or issues or problem solve, whether, again, it's at a global level, national level, organizational level, an individual, relational level. I want you to kind of think about that, and that's what the discussion board this week will focus on. Next week, I'll break down dialogue a little bit more in some of the principles in the text, and also deal with some of the more, as I said before, more of the ethereal or philosophical ideas that Boehm outlines later in the text. So I hope you're enjoying your reading. Really, in many ways, the reason I always assign this text and that I think it's so important in terms of rhetoric and the work that we're doing is, especially in the climate that we live in, there's nothing more important than creating productive dialogue where we honor other people's points of view, where we become better listeners. And I think that by becoming better listeners and more empathetic, ultimately we become better uh, problem solvers. We become better able to manage and work through issues in a productive way rather than in a destructive way. So I hope all of you are doing as well as you can and taking care of yourselves. Your families are well, and there will be more to follow. Thanks.